We'd like to call now the other members of our panel discussion who are going to come up and join us. I think they're on the front row here, if you would. Okay, there's the seats. For our panel discussion on establishing high-performing networks. We're going to build on what Mr. Vestberg just talked about. So if they would all come up and take their seats. This is a big panel. Wow. Your names are on your seats.
Yeah. Fairly easy to find.
Yep.
If you know your name.
That's right. If you don't know your name,
then we have a problem to find it.
Well, I'm sure that Ericsson will provide a network for finding out how.
Absolutely.
That's right.
My friend.
Okay, welcome, everyone. Okay. In the interest of time, too, in the room we decided to is a little bit more intimate and smaller than we had thought. So we're going to just go down the line and ask each person if you would just introduce yourself so that the audience actually knows what you sound like. And we'll start here to my far right.
My name is Karin, and I'm the chairperson of the Policy and Regulatory Experts Group in an organization called Fiber to the Home Council Europe.
My name is Erik Huizer. I'm a CTO at SurfNet, the Dutch Academic and Research Network, and I'm a board member of GEANT, and GEANT is the European association where all the research and education networks in Europe come together. Okay.
My name is Kathrin Buvac. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Nokia, and I'm also acting as the spokesperson for the company on the Internet of Things, so very passionate about the topic that we're discussing here today.
And I guess I'm presented already.
Yeah, I think we know who you are. That's right.
I can present myself once again, but I'll leave it to Hannes instead.
Okay.
Thank you, Hans. Well, my name is Hannes Ametsreiter. I'm board member of Vodafone Group and also CEO of Vodafone Germany.
Okay.
My name is Sven Heistermann. I work with Google and I lead our strategic partnerships with the telco sector across Europe, the Middle East and Africa.
My name is Krzyzanowska. I work at the European Commission, DG Connect, and my responsibility is the broadband policy.
Okay, well, welcome to all of you. Let's talk about the notion of a connected gigabit society by 2025. What needs to be done now? I'm going to ask all of you if you could contribute to this one. What needs to be done now to get there by 2025? Let's start with what Google has to say.
Thank you. So first of all, I would say we at Google strongly support the vision of the European Commission to establish gigabit by 2025. We've seen a lot of positive evidence in markets where gigabit has already been rolled out. Not only economic benefits, social benefits, cultural benefits, and the time is really to start now by collaborating across all the actors that are active in this space. That will be my biggest wish. Let us all work together to get there now and not wait.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we fully support the vision and also the ambition of the European Commission and also Commissioner Oettinger, because we really believe it is about the gigabit society. It's about gigabit. It's about the global competitiveness which we need to generate, to keep companies, to develop companies. And I believe one thing is important, a few things are important. One, we need to bring fiber to the customers, industry, but also consumers. We, second, also need to have fiber to the base stations, fiber to the nodes. Only then 5G will happen. If we don't have fiber at the base stations, 5G will not happen. So we need to have an effort in Europe, in Germany, that we make that move. And the third one, then, it's very much about services, it's about software, it's about enabling an environment which is able to enable growth, to enable new foundations, new startups, new companies, new ideas, to really use all the opportunities which are then being given. Because we always discuss one thing, and that's bandwidth, that's speed. That's also important, that's great. But one thing we did not discuss so far, and that will be the new element in the whole development, and that's the latency. Latency, 5G latency is 1 millisecond.
Latency.
And that really makes a difference. It will enable so many more services, and that will be important for public administration, for health, for driving, for anything. So we believe that vision is great. We need to stay ahead, and we really need to have a harmonized and big effort to get it done. And we need to do it now.
But you believe it's possible by 2025?
Of course. I mean, if we do have the focus, if we do have all the alignment between politics on European level, on national level, that we really understand the opportunity, the chance which we would have and can generate out of the technologies, then I believe if we do have the common understanding, then we also can be fast enough, and we can be bold enough, and we can do the right things. But the harmonization of all these activities is now necessary. There's no room for discussing too long. Is 100 megabit enough for the next years? Of course not. I mean, it's obvious. Everybody knows.
Yeah.
We need to have more. We are showing a gigabit per second today with Ericsson equipment. So Hans, it's your equipment, and it's over 10 meters. More than 1 gigabit. So it's working already. We just need to get it done.
I agree with Hannes, of course, and even my friend from Google there. That's a lot of it. There are two things. The rest of the world will do it, just to be clear on that, if we now talk Europe. I mean, there are already regions that are pushing super hard for doing this. The second is that I think, and I spent a lot of time with the UN, with different countries in the world, I think it's extremely important for governments understanding that mobility, broadband, and cloud is the 21st century's infrastructure. I mean, we need hospitals, yes, we need roads, and we need schools. But if we don't get the whole community of governments, and now I talk about all governments in the world, understanding and making regulation that we actually think about this as an infrastructure, and not only the Minister of Finance thinks it's a good way to finance the budget, it's also to bring growth to the country. It's in order to include people in the country. I think that, for me, is something that I'm really, really excited about, and I think that we all need it. The technology-wise, I agree with Hannes, they're proven, we can do it, but it also needs to be a thought leadership from governments to understand how important this is for the future of our society.
Yeah, I mean, when you say for the rural areas, for example, that it's an infrastructure issue that needs to be in our heads when we think about the 21st century.
Yeah.
I mean, we still have a problem delivering other services to rural areas on the same basis as we do in urban areas.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is we have to change that.
Yeah.
And so that there isn't a difference between rural
Absolutely.
and urban areas.
We need to think about this as an infrastructure that actually creates growth in the country. It makes inclusion in the country. It creates new services. Hannes talked about digital healthcare, digital education.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to think like the 21st century here. And then I think that the mobility, broadband, and cloud, and 5G and all of that plays fantastically in. And I agree with what Oettinger and the broadband for all is discussing. It's just that we need to see that is happening in the real actions in countries in different constellations.
Okay. So what do you think about the vision?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with my peers on the panel. I think what we really need to make sure in Europe, and we've heard it throughout the presentations just now, is that we create an investment conducive environment in Europe that supports the digital agenda. I think the Commission has delivered a fantastic framework with the digital single market to do that. I fully agree with Hans, your perspective that it is probably not a technology challenge. The biggest challenge, and that's where my Internet of Things passion comes out as well, is really to get the vertical sectors, which are very, very strong in Europe, being it the automotive space, being it healthcare, being it education, being it manufacturing, to come closer together with the telecommunications world.
Okay.
I think in my perspective, if I could predict, we will no longer have pointed relationships. We will have partnerships. We will have full ecosystems that need to get together. We've heard about the digital highway in Germany as an example where Nokia was participating there. We work with Continental as an example, Deutsche Telekom, Fraunhofer Institute. It's just possible if you form consortia. And I think the other thing that we've heard in Commissioner Oettinger's speech is the 5G private-public partnerships. And whilst the Commissioner alluded to the 700 million budget that is being made available through the Commission and through the EU member states, I will say that from representing the private side here with industries, we predict that it will be 3.5 billion euros on top that will be made available through us, industry players, through startups, etc. In fact, Nokia is chairing that association on the 5G PPP. But I believe really it's about the use cases, the partnerships, the willingness to upfront invest, which is very, very faint to our industry.
How are you going to do rural areas, for example?
Rural areas, in my view, it's humanitarian, if I may say so.
Yeah.
It's really providing lower cost, efficient deployment models. We have at Nokia a solution that is called the Nokia Fast Mile that connects through a smart LTE connectivity solution, the rural areas, with a lower approach and technology than you would have it in the macro environments.
But you're saying the technology is already there. So
the technology is there, indeed, indeed. But we need to make sure to connect the different communities and to provide, I will not call it low cost, but lower cost alternatives for people to be able to board on ultra broadband connectivities. I mean, just, I don't have the stats for Europe, but think about 20% out there in the world globally is not able to have coverage to their homes.
That's right.
in the really already very sophisticated countries. I'm not talking about the emerging markets that are onboarding. And I consider technology or communication as a humanitarian right almost.
And I mean, I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to speak here, but let me just ask one more thing about the rural areas. Do you foresee in the future rural areas and customers having a choice? Or is there going to be one company that's going to basically be the sole provider? Because it is a rural area. I mean, you have that now in the developed world, even in rural areas, when people want internet service, they usually just have one provider. Do you see a future where there's going to be competition?
There will always be choice. That will be my prediction. There will always be choice. Is it the same choice that we have today in the megacities, or will there maybe new partners? We just announced the Mobile World Congress, a partnership with Facebook to connect the 4 billion unconnected people out there. I will leave that for everyone else to judge, but there will be competition for sure.
All right. You want to pick up on the notion of the gigabyte vision?
Right. Well, my customers are researchers and teachers. And whatever field they may be in, not just the science, but also in the humanities, etc. Nowadays, if you want to be best in your field, if you want to be the best teacher, if you want to be the best researcher, you need ICT. You need the best and the most advanced ICT. And frankly, at this point in time, we are already delivering all over Europe to our researchers and teachers. We're delivering 1 gigabit. So we are aiming at 2020 for 1 terabit. And that's not just, you know, when CERN starts the LHC, of course, that gives an enormous amount of data, and you need terabit for that. But nowadays, even I met a guy recently who researches medieval texts, and he scans them in super high resolution, and then analyzes them for spots and stuff like that to see which are the same writers and stuff like that. And he needs to do the analysis in a supercomputer in another country, so he needs high-speed bandwidth to get there. I'd like to come back to one point, though. It's not just the high speed that we need. We are talking high performance. And high performance has other implications. It's not just speed, it is reliability. It needs to be reliable. And today we see that most connections to houses, for example, are not reliable. And we can't afford that anymore. Our citizens are becoming too dependent on that. So reliability is one. And also, on top of that, we also need a trust and identity infrastructure to make it a high performance. So you need to work on European identities that can be used to access services and to make sure that you can use cloud services without having like 600 identities all over the place, which can be misused and stuff like that. And last but not least, the security part of it. It is obviously that we need to take that into account, and that includes the privacy side, which Mr. Oettinger already referred to.
We'll come back to that in just a moment too.
Well, yeah. Of course, when you hear the title Fiber to the Home Council Europe, you think it's very, very narrow. That's very far from the truth, actually. We're looking very widely and broadly on the infrastructure discussion and what is needed to drive exactly what you heard from both Hans and Mr. Oettinger before. And I think it's very good to hear today that we're agreeing on this topic completely all over the line. That wasn't really the case a while ago. I think we see all these infrastructures as complementary. It's an ecosystem. And for us to hear about the push for 5G, that is great, because more 5G also drives fiber in the ground, of course. You need a backhaul, you need the resilient networks, you need the offloading. We don't want any jitters or lagging or anything in the networks if you want to start driving the cars autonomously and all those services we talk about today. So I think we have a very common ground to stand on here. We want to push Europe forward. We have some really good examples, I think, already in Europe. We have Sweden, Portugal, Spain. We see great progress. I'm a bit curious what's going to happen in the UK now when we saw the last report from Ofcom. But I think we agree on the Gigabit Society Day and what we can do together to achieve it.
I mean, it's good to see so much consensus on a panel with so many people. That's something that's rare.
We need to find some new questions.
Exactly
there
right.
to get us going.
I mean, it must be very good actually for the Commission as well when you see this type of
Indeed,
consensus.
I have to say that this is a panel of my dreams. I have been on many panels where people were trying to convince me in public that nobody will ever use more than 30 megabits per second.
Right.
Wrong panel.
I hope
Right.
these days are way in the past. It is indeed a concurring view. We have reviewed foresight literature. We have reviewed the positions of companies that are present in this panel and others. And there is a high level of consensus among future users that quality of networks will determine their success. That is true for the research community that currently is working on services and products that will need connectivity to be deployed. But it is also true from users that we have surveyed in the public consultation, over 1,500 responses, with a high level of consent. And it's not only speed, indeed, it is about upload, by far the most important aspect of quality of networks. It is also about ubiquitous access and the fact that nobody is left behind. But if I may come back to your initial question, and your initial question was how. I think that the Commission, we are looking at 3 pillars through which we can change that reality. It's policy, it's digital single market, which is by far the most ambitious, demand-stimulating policy we've ever had at the European Commission. It is through regulation, making sure that there are rules, and they are phrased in such a way that investment is, on one hand, ambitious, and on the other hand, profitable for those who actually build these networks. And finally, it is access to finance, which went through its frustrations, but now with the Juncker package, there's a considerable pool of funds from the European Investment Bank and other finance providers, which is ready to be used by digital projects.
And so is it possible to say today, looking at the year 2025, that financing to make this network a reality by 2025, that financing is secure?
Well, no financing is ever secure, and we have learned by the crisis that things can change fairly quickly. There is a lot of money available. This money can finance projects of a higher risk, which, as you mentioned, in rural areas will always be a stretch. I would even say that in rural areas we will still need public sector investment in the form of grants. Some areas will not sustain modern infrastructure or modernization of infrastructure. So if policy says that infrastructure modernization should also be in rural areas, we will have to use different sources of financing for that. But what is important that these 3 elements, which are the main drivers of investment in infrastructure, are coming and having policy wind in the sails at the same time, which was not the case in the past. When we had one, we didn't have the other. So now all 3 of them can lever and perhaps push the paradigm.
What do you think has changed? Why now? Why do you have this convergence now of everything coming together?
Well, I think that there is a certain logic in it. It came as a policy, as a digital agenda for Europe. It built its credibility. It also looked at the world around us, which is, as you said, moving in an incredibly fast pace. The fact that there's an alignment between policy and financing, it was a policy decision of the Juncker Commission to put it on top of the political agenda. The fact that the review of the regulatory framework comes at the same time is a happy coincidence, but it still is a very good one.
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, 2 things I would like to add to the discussion. So first, I really love that enthusiastic discussion about the topics, the vision, the ambition. That's fantastic. but it always starts with reality. And reality at the moment is that if I take the FTTH Council or FTTP Council, Germany second last in Europe, third last global. So we are starting somewhere. We are not at the top. We are not at the forefront. So there's a lot to do. So that's the real picture. And we are not ahead. We are kind of behind. And if you then look at the global competition, we are now facing a situation that other manufacturers out there producing cars, automobiles, whatever, they're not sending the car to the garage. They just send a software patch, and it's fixed. And there's a new feature then in that car. So that is a totally new environment. We are not used to that. And there's another thing, that why would you need a mobile network for cars? You need, because if you just press the key, the car is at the moment able to park into a parking lot. That is not difficult. If you do the same, and we are running that research in Dresden at the Technische Universität, if you do it with 4 cars, it's not working. They block themselves because they are working with sensors. Then you need to have an overlaying network to coordinate everything. So the coordination of things flying, you see drones all over, you see cars all over. Autonomous driving means you transport a lot of data, and it needs to be coordinated. And we shouldn't forget that. If we would like, and if we want, and we need to be, we not just need to have made in Germany, it needs to be developed in Germany, which is a bit more, and including software. And so, I mean, if we carry that picture, if we move towards that, then it is much more. But it always starts with that understanding what is necessary, and what can be achieved, and what is out there already. And you cannot anymore think in a time span of 5 or 6 years in producing whatever. You need to be faster. If you are in the world of software, it means a few weeks, a few months. It's just faster. And infrastructure will enable that one. So we need to have that state-of-the-art infrastructure to really be able to have global competitiveness. And I believe it will be very, very important, especially if you produce a lot of things, not only cars, but all the other stuff the same.
You said in your presentation, you were talking about how fast everything is changing.
Yeah.
And also the fact that a generation is being born, or you've got a generation that they're becoming adults, that they will have no recollection of what life was like, even with...
Like ours.
Well, they will not remember what it's like. I mean, I know I have interns now, and I say VCR,
yeah.
and they think I'm talking about, a car or something from the past. They have no idea what a VCR is.
No.
So what can we do, though, to ensure that, with all of this networking that we're talking about here, that we're actually going to be able to keep up with it intellectually?
I think intellectually, I mean, first of all, I would like to come back to, I mean, where we have come so far has been private money by operators being invested in the whole world. I mean, sometimes we tend to forget enormous investment where we are, and with the coverage where it's unparalleled. There's no other technology that's been spread so much. That's number one.
Okay.
Number two, I just want to come back to the comment on the financing. That's what I was trying to say. If sort of the public and governments understand that this is the 21st century's infrastructure, they will do both meaning infrastructure investments. They need to do incentivize in rural areas in order to get there, but they also need certainty on investments for operators. I think that's things that we see now happening in certain parts of the world, and I know that the Commission is trying the same. But if we don't have that, you're not going to see the money coming in. Of course, you can have public money in certain areas, but the money is private money is the majority. That's number one. I just wanted to replicate on that. On sort of the change, I think what we believe internet has been around for a long time. But to be honest, in a technology revolution, it's a very short time we have internet. So of course, this question about security, privacy, and things like that are not really mature. And think about what Hannes talked about when you have one connected car, that's great, but to be honest, when you get the greatness in when you have all the cars connected to each other, then you can have enormous efficiency. But it comes with challenges. And that's where we need, of course, to work together in a totally different way. And that's really where you get efficiency, improvement, sustainability, and all of that. And I think that's really where we need a debate, and having the youngsters that you have as interns, not people like like me, not you, also young, to really understand how we are maturing the usage of internet. There are different internets. We heard about that. You're talking about it has to be secure and reliable. It's not only the speed anymore. So I think whole that notion we need to start debating, and Europe need to take that to its heart, because that's, if Europe's going to keep the edge that we've had, we need to take that discussion.
Who's going to secure all of these networks, though, and guarantee the safety, data? You were talking about data security. Who's going to secure that? Because we're talking about a level of networked society that we've never known before.
What you saw in my slide, and you heard also Hannes and also my colleague from Nokia, it's going to be sliced networks in 5G, which is very different from any other technology. It's coming from the device, which could be a car, a sensor, or a mobile phone, up to the cloud. And that has to be a slice that is optimized for security, reliability, latency, throughput, whatever you have decided. That's what the companies are trying to standardize right now, companies like Nokia and Ericsson. That's how we want the standard in the future. Then we can secure that and say, this is a public safety sort of slice of the network. We can guarantee that this is for teachers that needs extremely reliable data, or this is actually for YouTube and people are going to have great with that as well. That is the future in order for us to actually be able to deliver it. And I think the whole virtualization, SDN, NFV, fantastic acronyms, enormously important for this.
So,
Yep, go ahead.
if I may react to that, because I can tie the two issues together, I think. In my view, one of the most important elements for security is making the public aware. And
but don't you think the public is aware now?
No, it isn't. We are teaching our children in schools everything about the physical world. We're teaching them zilch about the logical world. And we should start by teaching children also about the logical world in the schools. And to do that, of course, you need to connect the schools. You make sure that the schools have, most of the schools in Germany, in the Netherlands, in lots of European countries have lousy connectivity. And we need to start changing that. And by investing in connectivities to schools, governments can stimulate the market, because they do that with public tenders, and then parties have to go out, they have to dig, they have to lay fiber, and then a neighborhood can be connected too. And we saw that with GEANT, the European Research and Education Network for Higher Education. We went into countries where there were monopolies. We were aided by the Commission to go in there and lay our networks, and by that we became a sort of semi-competitor to the incumbent, and then that started off competition. So by investing some money in education and research, the Commission and national governments can stimulate that we get connectivity to schools and thereby to whole neighborhoods. And then at the same time we can teach our children to be aware of the logical environment, aware of the dangers that lurk out there, and that will help improve security.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to also answer up to that one, because I think what we see, you talked about fiber penetration and where we find different countries in Europe today. We have three factors which we see in all these regimes that are really successful today and on the top ranking on all these infrastructure solutions. They have a regime with a focus. They want to do something. It's not about choosing between investing in infrastructure or in public health or in schools or whatever. They use their investments in infrastructure to really level up on the educational system and also on healthcare and everything else in their environment. But we also see them looking at investments, putting a regime out for investments in rural area and in urban areas where you might have more market-driven operators in the urban areas than in rural. So you need to have a program for that. And we also see regimes with regulatory topics that are adapted to certain situations that could stimulate this further. So, of course, schools need to be adopted, they need to be connected, but we also see that happening. And those are, I think, the good examples that we should put forward in Europe today.
Another thing with schools, hospitals, clinics, being connected now, what does that do to security in terms of cyber attacks? Who are we going to expect to protect municipalities, for example, that have even more networks, that are even more interconnected, where the connectivity levels reach levels that we can't even dream of. Who are we going to rely on to ensure not only the structural integrity of those networks, but to make sure that the networks aren't used against us? Who wants to take a stab at that one? Let's ask the Commission.
Well, cybersecurity is an important subject, but there is perhaps a tendency to immediately jump into the Commission, and when people start looking at the Commission, there's always a danger there's going to be something is going to be regulated to the point that we're going all to feel extremely safe, and it's not going to cost very much, but it may also create inflexibilities which are dangerous for the future. The discussion of cybersecurity is an important discussion which accompanies the policy of the digital single market. And I wouldn't venture a statement that it's an easy subject. It's probably the most difficult of all the subjects that we are dealing with, because we cannot afford to get it wrong. The simplicity will probably one of the driving ideas. What is the minimum requirement and the minimum level of trust between different actors that needs to be established so that the system can be open to auto-improvements and auto-corrections. I believe that that is the most important thing that we are currently looking at.
I think that one of the biggest problems that any government and the Commission is wrestling with is the balance between security and safety. And I think the current battle going on in the US about one iPhone and unlocking that is a perfect example. As soon as Apple gives in and unlocks that iPhone, why does Apple have to give in to the US government? They should also give in to the Chinese government. And once the Chinese have access to iPhones, we feel threatened. So this is a very complex, and you can't see this in a local environment anymore. It's a very complex arena that is global, and part of the solution needs to come from the technology side, part of the solution needs to come from government side, but in the end, I think we need to work together as multi-stakeholders, because we all have a stake in this to solve this problem. And like I say, awareness is one of the important parts of that.
I was going to ask...
I can just say quickly, I agree. If everything is going to be connected, as we believe all of us in this panel, there's going to be 3 big challenges, because not everything is going to be positive. And the 3 challenges: security, privacy, and resilience of data. And it will not be one company, as we discussed, that will fix it, nor one government. It has to be a discussion, because the technology will happen. So we just need to have a multi-stakeholder discussions on all these issues and sort it out over time, because of course it's going to be criminal. They cannot go to a bank anymore. There's no money there. So where are they going? I mean, they have to go to the internet. So of course we need to understand they're moving as well. So we just need to see, we need to have that multi-stakeholder discussion with all of us involved. I think that's what's going to happen. No one can have one solution.
And Bill,
Go ahead.
no, just building on what you just said, Hans, I like the differentiation you put, because I think headlines are often about data security, but in reality, the data security, I think we, as an industry, have a huge responsibility to tackle the problem. You spoke about slicing the network in a different way. We have to start to protect the network at the cloud edges and no longer in the hardware environment. Think about healthcare implants. It might be a little sensor that sits somewhere here in your vein, and that little thing has just one task to do, is to measure your predictability if you have a heart attack in 48 hours, and you can just run to the doctor. That little sensor that would sit in your vein is too dumb to protect your data. So the network needs to take over that responsibility. The other thing I will just say, apart from all the security, data ownership, in my view, is a likewise enormous issue. And I can just speak really on my behalf. If I go to a doctor today, I want to see Dr. A, and that transfers me to a Dr. B. I don't have a right to receive my X-ray copies today.
You don't have a right.
I do not.
Where are you going to the doctor?
I can ask for it. I will never get it. The email would reach from the hospital or the Dr. A to the Dr. B. Because I have, in the moment I register with the doctor, in Germany at least, I would register that my data stays with the doctor.
Okay.
Same goes with cars. The moment I sign a leasing contract in Germany, I give my data that I have for consumption of the car to the leasing company. That's matter of fact, yeah.
If I may, Kathrin, I completely agree. Because actually, let's take a step back. What is important in moving society to 2025 to a gigabit society? Users need to trust that their data is safe and secure, right?
Indeed.
And it's our joint responsibility to make sure that that happens. I think we at Google have been pushing that for years. We've encrypted our connections in email, in mail, in maps, in all our services. So even at the application level, not only on the network level, it is important to have this security that spans throughout and gives us the trust of the user.
But are we looking at a world that is being formed now where people expect security and safety to be guaranteed by the corporate private sector and no longer by the state? I mean, the Apple FBI example, is that the future? Where, I mean, because, you know, if we were sitting here last year, 2 years ago, and I had asked the audience, do you believe that Apple is an advocate for your data protection? No one would have raised his or her hand. But of course, now the discussion is Apple is trying to protect us from the government. Is that what is going to happen in our hyper-networked society?
I think there's always a risk of asking a binary question and expect a simple answer, and the answer is not simple. And perhaps to give a little bit of perspective to the discussion, please remember that the first steam train that was going through the US had a man on horseback with a red flag going in front of it.
Yeah.
So the security issues were already well understood at that time.
Yeah.
It is not true that one or the other will take care of the safety or security issues. And again, you expect the police to know the rules of the traffic and do certain judgment. You expect a company, which may be private or public, to run decently the signaling system, and you expect a car manufacturer to build certain security issues within your car. Not to mention that we expect drivers to actually know what they are doing. So. Right. It is a trust built among many stakeholders towards a certain purpose. Hence, when I said that, you know, when people look at me or my colleagues at the Commission, they usually expect some sort of regulatory answer. And regulatory answer may not be the right answer, or at least not the first right answer. Mm-hmm. The right answer is establishing which group can best estimate and mitigate risks which appear in the world, and have either a voluntary or a mandatory agreements of taking care of those risks. So the answer is not going to be very simple here.
I agree.
What about Google? I'll give you the last word. I see Mr. Oettinger is back in the room. We want to ask him to give a few closing comments. But what about do you have any? I've got in my notes here that you were going to come with some examples of our network society. I mean, what role do you think Google is going to play?
Well, there's one example that probably goes back to the rural connectivity. And, many of you have maybe heard about the Project Loon, the balloons that are floating around the equator in the southern hemisphere.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
That beam down the internet to rural communities. And we're currently in trial stages, in technical trials with all the operators in Indonesia to provide exactly that, where it's not possible to cost-effectively build a network and some remote islands to provide it down from the balloons. Let me emphasize that is done in very, very close collaboration with all the operators actually in the market, so there's a lot of choice, I think, for users as well. Think of it as a, as a tower company in the sky. And to generalize that point a little more, we think about 2025, which is now 9 years out. I think in some of the approaches we take to achieve a gigabit society by 2025, thinking a bit revolutionary and thinking a bit out of the box will certainly not harm us over here in Europe.
Thank you very much. To all of you, thank you. Mr. Oettinger has returned, and we understand that Mr. Oettinger would like to give a closing statement, closing comments about the panel discussion. So, Herr Oettinger, Sie haben das Wort jetzt.
Dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me thank you for taking part, being here. I think your know-how and your advice is appreciated, and I'm willing to continue to ask people as you are to give us perfect guidance on our way to Europeanizing digital policies. I'm glad that this panel had a first-hand opportunity to discuss on the main aspects of which connectivity Europe needs beyond 2020. I've heard from many calls of citizens, from public authorities, and from a number of economic sectors for setting ambitious connectivity targets beyond 2020, looking to 2025. My vision is that everyone should enjoy adequate connectivity to fully benefit from digital opportunities and from the digital single market. For me, the adequate level of connectivity is a European gigabyte society by 2025. As I said during my keynote speech, it will be based on 3 pillars. Firstly, gigabyte connectivity for socio-economic drivers. Secondly, future-proof, ubiquitous connectivity to support all forms of mobility. And thirdly, improved connectivity in rural areas. On the first priority, the socio-economic drivers are schools, are hospitals, libraries, public administration, and business centers. That is how we create opportunities for experimentation, especially for the new generation of users who have a great appetite for creativity and innovation. The impact of our gigabyte connectivity will go beyond these socio-economic drivers, bringing high-performance connectivity closer to interested companies, in particular SMEs and households, especially in rural areas. Creativity and innovation is based on interaction and therefore requires more than only download speed. Gigabyte connectivity will deliver, and the other necessary quality parameters such as higher upload speed and lower latency. This is a practical step towards a truly digital economy and society enabled by unconstrained connectivity. It will facilitate the deployment of networks beyond the socio-economic drivers themselves. It will support cloud adoption, in particular by SMEs, facilitate opportunities linked to big data and high-performance computing, and contribute to the needs of 5G deployment. Given the time horizon for investment and the incredibly quick evolution of the digital sector, we need to know today what we want to achieve beyond 2020. We cannot wait until then to act. It's today that we need to be more ambitious. It's important for everybody, for all European countries, for any sector of the economy. And it's particularly relevant for businesses and industry. Europe's future economic success will be based on innovations and new business models that will make the most of digital networks, not just telecom infrastructure, but also cloud computing, big data, connected cars, the digitization of our industry, and so on. It's not a coincidence that I hear so many supportive voices here at CeBIT. You can count on us to use all these possibilities available to create an investment-friendly environment that will ensure transition to high-speed networks fit for the next decades, but also financial support in areas where market solutions are unlikely to emerge. We count on your support to this end. And we are looking forward to more discussions like the one you just had, and to working together with all of you to give Europe the connectivity it needs for next decades, for our common future. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, yeah, thank you to our panelists. We're going to play musical chairs for about 60 seconds, and we're going to begin a second panel discussion. So again, thank you to all of you for taking the time to talk with us today. It was a great discussion. Thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bren.
Nice meeting you. Nice meeting you.
Thank
Good
you.
seeing you. Thanks. Nice
Yeah.
meeting you. Thanks.